Outside the Box Reviews, it's Figure Wars! And today we're comparing two figures of Godzilla from the 1994 movie Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. On the left we have the new NECA version, and on the right we have the SH Monsterarts version. Now, I've already reviewed the Monsterarts version, but this had come up, I believe, on my review of the NECA 2014 Godzilla, whether it be worth comparing the NECA and the Figuarts ones. There was some kind of mixed comments on it, but I decided ultimately it would be worth a shot to compare these guys because, let's face it, Monsterarts is incredible, but it's kind of a mid-range collectible price range. It's not super inexpensive, it's not super expensive, but it sits in a kind of balance there. And NECA, of course, is much easier to pick up at local stores, at least for a lot of people, and definitely a much lower price point. So this may not be a real comparison of which is the absolute better figure, more a comparison of what you get for your investment. However, as I'm starting this review, I realize that I cannot review just these two figures and make a full comparison because this guy needs to be taken into account too. Now, originally I wasn't going to go into the SH Monsterarts Burning Godzilla with these other two. However, Monsterarts has recently released the Godzilla Birth version, which I guess is technically supposed to be Godzilla Jr. from the end of Godzilla vs. Destroya. That's the official story on it. But it basically comes across as a redo of the guy we have here on the right, the 1994 Godzilla, because it is that paint scheme, that look, just on this newer Godzilla body. So I could see a lot of people, if they go to pick up a Godzilla, just a standard Heisei from the Monsterarts line, that may be the one that's easier to get these days, and while I don't have that one in my collection, I know I can use this Burning Godzilla as a pretty fair stand-in for it, and we could talk about the differences between the three. So let's jump right in. And since at least my version of these figures have no accessories, the original release of the Monsterarts version did come with a breath effect, but I didn't get the original version. And sculpt is definitely an area where these two figures vary greatly, and I realize as I go through the review on these figures, a lot of my comments are gonna be kinda nitpicky, because overall, these are both decent representations of the Godzilla 94 suit, but there's some small differences that can make a big difference. And what we can see here clearly is a very large difference in the shape of the head and also the amount of detail placed into the sculpt. On the right, you can see the Monsterarts version is pretty much scaled throughout. Every little bit of him has little scaly bits and a very intricate sculpt. NECA's is a little smooth around the bridge of the nose and maybe a little more pronounced at the top of the head. The ears on the Monsterarts version are much more pronounced, sticking out to the side. On NECA's, they actually kind of fade into the eyebrow from the front view of the figure. One thing NECA's figure does have is a more prominent nose. You can actually see the nostrils on here, while on the Monsterarts it's actually a little skimped over, so that is actually one area where NECA has excelled. If we open the mouths on these figures, we could also see some more major differences there. The Monsterarts version is much more fully sculpted, the teeth are more individual. NECA's, they're a little more kind of down and less large, I guess you could say. The tongue on the Monsterarts version is also much larger. The one on the NECA figure is a little skinnier. However, both figures do have pretty good detail on the roof of their mouths, which is really nice. A lot of great sculpting detail in there. The absolute biggest difference between these two head sculpts, and the one that actually made me run back to the movie to check and see which one was more accurate, is the length of the snout and kind of how wide and flat it is versus skinny. NECA is a little more of a boxy shape to their head. It's a longer snout, and it doesn't come out nearly as wide as the Monsterarts version. The Monsterarts is the more accurate sculpt. Going back and looking at the movie, it's definitely much more true to Godzilla 1994. I like NECA's sculpt. I think it's a great take on Godzilla, and when I first saw it, it really reminded me of the scene, not from this movie, but a few movies back, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. There's a scene where a man is in an office high up in a building and confronts Godzilla and sees him face to face and gets blasted, and it really is reminiscent of that look to me. I know it's a pretty similar suit, but that was the kind of image I was seeing when I saw it. But not entirely accurate there, but pretty good overall. I'm not down on it. It's good Godzilla look, if that makes any sense. As for the sculpts on the spines, the NECA one is pretty similar to the Monsterarts version. There's not a whole lot of difference. Monsterarts has some deeper texturing in their spines, and NECA's is a little more shallow. Part of that's probably because these are rubberized fins. You can actually move them around, while the Monsterarts are very, very rigid. And when it comes to articulation, I much prefer the way NECA went with these, because it really frees up this figure to be much more posable. The sculpts, as I said, are very similar. It's super nitpicking if I'm going to go through these and compare them to the movie. They both look like Godzilla's spines. I got no problem with them. Coming around to the front of the figures, I think my overall theme of this is the sculpting depth on the Monsterarts version is much more. The figure has much deeper grooves, deeper scales, more prominent scales. NECA's are just more of a surface kind of thing. And that is fine. It looks just fine, and on its own, if you weren't comparing it to the Monsterarts version, I think it would be perfectly passable in your collection. But looking at the two of them, there is a large difference there. The other thing that NECA has going on is a much wider upper torso. The entire figure is actually kind of more boxy than the Monsterarts version. And once again, I must say, the Monsterarts version is the more accurate version here. You can also see that by the way NECA has done their articulation, their neck is a little on the thick side as well. Looking at the figure's arms, more of the same. Deeper sculpting on the Monsterarts version, more shallow on the NECA version. I like the sculpt on NECA's hands though. I think they did a really good job. I like the way the claws look. I like the angle of everything. Really well done. I was never really a huge fan of the pose they put on these hands for the Monsterarts version. Coming down to the lower torso, it's the one place where NECA's is a deeper cut in here. I think this might have to do with the articulation, but there's a very deep groove here at his crotch, where it's not nearly as deep on the Monsterarts version. But more of the same through the legs. We also kind of see here NECA put their knee joint much lower than Monsterarts did, especially because Monsterarts has the double jointed knee. NECA's kind of starts with a lower joint on the Monsterarts starts. So it actually kind of gives it this weird look of having very long thighs. Then coming down to the feet, really not a huge difference between the two. And one thing I'm seeing a pattern of with the articulation, I know we're not quite there yet, but as it relates to the sculpt, NECA put a lot of articulation with things over other parts of the figure, which makes sense. They're probably going to reuse this body. I'm assuming it's the same body as the 1985 Godzilla, and they're just going to retool a couple parts on it. But you can see the way the foot is actually includes part of the ankle here that comes up around the leg. It kind of makes him look like he has cankles a little bit. The same thing has to do with the neck, where I said the neck looked a little too thick. Monsterarts, because of the way they sculpted it and did the articulation, the ankle joint actually comes inside of the leg joint, makes it look a little skinnier and a little better in my opinion. But once again, very minor nitpicking here. Coming down to the tail, the biggest difference here is the fact that the Monsterarts tail is considerably longer than the NECA one. It's hard to show them laying side by side, especially on my limited background space here, but the Monsterarts is probably a couple, almost 3 or 4 inches longer than NECA's version. Now I really am not sure which one's more accurate, but I like having the longer tail. I think it looks cooler, but for shelf space, I could see why NECA would go with the shorter one, plus just packaging and everything like that. But nothing bad, it's just not as cool. Bringing in the Monsterarts, burning Godzilla, substituting for the birth version of Godzilla. I think this head sculpt is even superior than the other Monsterarts figure. It's a little wider, a little more broad across the front, and once again, just a little more accurate than this NECA one. The rest of the figure, it's a lot of the same kind of details. It's the deeper sculpting, everything like that. The burning Godzilla, the birth Godzilla do have a lot more points of articulation and consequently a lot more gaps in the figure, which has always been a lot of people's problem with this figure. So NECA doesn't have too bad of gaps around him, which is kind of redeeming quality on that part. As far as paint goes, Godzilla is a really easy thing to paint. There's not a whole lot of detail in it. The one thing I am not as fond of with NECA's version are the eyes. We could see that the eyes really go with that orangey red. There is some detail in there, but it's really hard to see. I'm not sure if it's picking up on camera, but he does have the black pupil, he has some yellow around it, and then it fades out to red. Very hard to see in the very small space they had to paint that eye. The Monsterarts version, on the other hand, has more white around the outside outside of the eye, and the same color is going on the inside, just much cleaner. Now I know for a fact that the Monsterarts figure uses a decal instead of paint, so that is a huge advantage they have and something you could do when it's a more expensive figure. So not really able to fault NECA as badly there, but just something that I really see as a big difference between these two figures in the overall look of the face. For the mouth, I think NECA did a pretty good job with the paint. It's a little dark in there, which isn't a bad thing at all. It looks much more realistic. I think more realistic than the costume actually looks. The costume went a little bright with their colors at times, but not bad at all. I like the detail on the tongue, kind of make it look slimy and gross. The one thing I see here is the teeth are very white, and that transfers down to the claws, which are actually kind of a bluish gray, and the toenails as well. And in the film, those parts are very, very yellow, and I checked both daytime and nighttime scenes, just wondering if they got painted off of kind of a different view of the character, but they're all very, very yellow in those things, and these are very white and gray and bluish, which is kind of strange. But NECA's not alone there. Monsterarts did get their teeth yellowed, but their claws, both on the feet and the hands, are white, or bone colored at least, so they don't really match up with the movie either. The other two big things to look at is the body overall on both these is a gray or a black. NECA's might be a little dark, but that's really minor. But the thing I've noticed is that while the Monsterarts has a nice matte paint job to it, NECA's is very, very shiny and kind of plasticky looking, which I think detracts a little bit from the overall look of the figure. The other thing worthy of note is back here on the spines, the fade between the dark and the light on the Monsterarts version is a little more organic looking. It's more of a hard line here on the NECA version. It looks more like paint lines as opposed to a natural kind of progression of the bone. For articulation, the Monsterarts isn't bad at all. He has a ball joint at the base of the neck, creating kind of a weird look. It's very almost unhinged looking here. His jaw is on a ball joint as well, so will open up and close and can also tilt for no good reason. He also has a joint down here at the base of the neck, so it can move forward and back and rotate just a little. He's got ball joints at his shoulders, so he can go in and out just a little bit and then forward and back. Very hindered by the sculpt. Can swivel at the bicep. He has a double joint at the elbow and a ball joint at the wrist. It's a ball joint at the waist. You can turn a little bit side to side, go a tiny bit forward and back, pretty much not enough to be worth it. But a lot of that is hindered because of the spines back here hitting into each other, so just can't get a great range out of that waist. Down here at the hips, it's also pretty limited. You can move in and out a little forward and back, but not much. You have a double joint at the knee, you have a rotation, and a ball joint at the foot. And then back here at the tail, it is all ball jointed segments up until this last little bit here at the end, so you can get a great range of motion out of that tail. NECA's figure really one-ups the original Monsterarts version. He has a ball joint here at the neck, same as the Monsterarts version. His went a little different way. Instead of having the big gap here, there's actually kind of a high collar on him, which also looks kind of weird, but it's basically just two attempts to tackle the same problem. His jaw is on a hinge, so it has a really good range of motion there. He has a ball joint at the base of the neck, so it can move up and down a little bit, side to side, as well as rotate. He has a ball joint at the shoulder, so it can go forward and back and out to the side. Out to the side is not so great, but forward and back is really nice and easy. You can swivel as well as there is a hinge inside of this upper bicep joint here. You can also bend and swivel at the elbow. It's almost like the bicep becomes part of a double jointed elbow. I don't know, it's kind of a strange joint there, but not complaining about it. It works well. We get a ball joint at the wrist, so we can go in and out a little bit as well as swivel. We also get a hinge at the fingers. This is kind of interesting. I haven't seen NECA do this on too many figures in the past, and I really like it. The only problem is the way the thumb's positioned. When you close it in, it doesn't really look like he's grabbing anything. Kind of a similar problem to a lot of Marvel Legends back in the Toy Biz era. We have a ball joint at the waist, which has a great range here. It goes side to side quite a bit, forward and back a lot, as well as kind of tilt side to side. Once again, these rubberized fins really let you move and just get in there and play with the articulation, which is fantastic. We have ball joints to leg and go forward and back, out to the side a little bit. These are very similar to the Godzilla 2014 figure, where you can kind of rotate it around inside of the socket and kind of get to line up as you need it to. He has a single jointed knee down here, like I said, a little low on the leg. It will swivel. He has a ball joint at the foot, and his tail is ball jointed up until here, so you have a few different segments back there that move very similar to the Monsterarts version, and then you have a bendy wire through the rest of the tail here. And coming back to the real reason why I brought in the Burning Godzilla, the articulation is the big difference here. He has a multi-jointed neck. The problem is kind of fixed here, so you don't have the weird kind of floating head or a high collar on it. It looks a lot better. There are many joints in there, let you get a great range of motion out of him. Though he won't look up as high as the original version. He also has a hinged jaw here, ball joint at the shoulders, and go forward and back, out to the side just a little bit. Swivel at the bicep, double jointed elbow, ball joint at the wrist. 2 joints here in the torso, so 2 separate ball joints, which give him a much better range of motion, especially forward and back. And also a little more side to side. It kind of lets you get those plates free of each other and rotate. Much better leg joint that's a little more free, can kind of swivel around inside the socket, go forward and back, out to the side a lot. Double jointed knee, several rotation points down here at the lower ankle, as well as a ball joint at the foot itself. And then once again, a ball jointed tail coming up almost to the very end of it. So great range of motion out of that as well. And as a comparison, here they are next to the Godzilla 2014 from NECA. The Bandai Creations Burning Godzilla, which if you're shopping mainly at Toys R Us, this is probably the only Heisei version of Godzilla you have in your collection if you haven't gone and gotten an import. Bandai Creations Space Godzilla, SH Monsterarts Space Godzilla, and last but not least the SH Monsterarts Mogura. And as you've probably seen throughout this review, this NECA one does stand a little bit taller than the Monsterarts version, but I think he still works fine in scale with any of the SH Monsterarts figures you bring in next to him. Obviously the Godzilla 2014 figure is supposed to be considerably larger than this NECA version. But as far as if you were imagining them being guys in suits, they're roughly in scale with each other. So overall, these are 2 great figures, and 3 great figures if you count the Burning Godzilla. And quite honestly, I think the SH Monsterarts Burning Godzilla is the winner for me in this figure war. It is the best articulated, the best sculpted, and I'm sure if I was gonna pick up that birth version, I'd probably love it because it looks pretty cool. And I might still pick it up. I just haven't committed to that one. I got some other Monsterarts to get out of the way before him. I still love the original SH Monsterarts Godzilla 94, but honestly, putting them in comparison with this NECA one, if you never got your hands on it and you don't want to invest in that birth version, this NECA one is not a bad way to go. It's about 1/3 the price of the Monsterarts version, and it really, really impressed me for the money. And I've gone through this review and I've been nitpicky, but I said up front that's what I was gonna do because that's the only way to really compare these guys. And the problems I have with it are pretty minor. The head isn't completely movie accurate, but it looks good. The body's a little shiny, but if it's on its own and not next to its exact counterpart made by another company, you're probably not gonna notice it that badly. The claws are a little off-colored, but heck, so are the Monsterarts ones. And the amount of articulation NECA packed into this figure is really, really impressive, and I have to give them total credit for making a fantastic figure that I honestly was worried wasn't going to be that good when I saw the prototypes. So I guess you could say, no matter what figure wins this figure wars, and I am very interested to hear your opinions in the comments below. Let me know which one you think is getting you the most for your money. I think the real winner out of all of this is us collectors, because both companies have put out some really great Godzilla releases. And I continue to recommend both SH Monsterarts versions, and I'm definitely going to give this NECA one a recommendation as well. Absolutely phenomenal figures. Make sure you check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. Until next time, this has been another Outside the Box Reviews. Stay tuned for more to come.